Do you want to maximize influence over yourself and the people around you? Do you want to have a clear path of career acceleration where you constantly get offered new opportunities, new growth, and the best positions available out there? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. If you're tired of being passed over for raises, promotions, and other new opportunities, then listen carefully. There are three things that you must do in order to position yourself. In fact, these are skills that help you position yourself in a leadership position. So rather than being an individual contributor, you get to grow teams, lead teams, grow your opportunity. You'll stop getting passed over because people recognize these skills as influential to their own success. And when you implement them in the right way, you gain control, access, power. Now, what are these three things? I'm going to cover these three things, and then you want to look at these as skills, and we're going to talk about them individually. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Let's start with number one, your ability to organize people. It is so important that you're able to organize individuals around solutions, around specific results, around certain outcomes. So I was working for a Fortune 100 bank, and we had about 40,000 servers, and the group I was working with was responsible for defect management. So there's hundreds of thousands of defects. They're rated critical to low, and these defects come from operating system failures, problems in the environment, software code, application issues, a wide range of things. There are about 40,000 servers, and there are two groups of servers. So there's Unix servers and Windows servers. Now, originally, leadership wanted me to get together all of these people. There's about 25 in each group that were leads, and each of those individuals had about 15 to 20 people working for them. And leadership wanted everybody on the phone to go over this defect list and to start rationing these out. And what I mean by rationing out these defects for resolution. And that would have been hundreds of people on a call. So when I talk about the ability to organize people, it's not about how many people you can get together, about how many followers you have, about how many leads you have if you're a service business, or how many friends you have. It's about being able to look at a group of people and logically organize these people to resolve the issue at hand. So our goal was to eliminate all critical defects in the environment. Our goal was to reduce the amount of time it took to solve these problems because they're time critical. So, for example, if today a bug came out, the organization has to resolve that bug in a certain amount of days. Otherwise, it's vulnerable to hackers. And so, we also want to organize people in a logical way. If you threw all the Unix leads and all the Windows leads on the phone at the same time, and they were talking about problems in their environment, if you had an equal number of people from both groups, then you can guarantee that for every idea or every discussion you have, that at least half the people on the call have no interest in it, because the Unix operating system and the Windows operating systems are different. The Unix operating system is a different set of applications. The Windows environment has different set of applications. A lot of the Windows environment tended to be more infrastructure related, and then the Unix environment more application related. So it's even the application of the services were not relevant to each other. And so in a business environment, if you're going to hold a meeting, you don't want half the people on the call to feel the meeting is useless. And so if we organize the meeting, we would just, we would rotate from topic to topic. And so maybe people would stay interested in the call, but we'd have 3-hour long calls, and it would just be a complete waste of time. But if you organize the people and you have one call for the Unix people and one call for the Windows people, you now can focus, at least from a subject matter interest, that everybody on the call will receive the majority of their time to be perceived as valuable. And so, again, the ability to organize people. Not only did I split the groups into Unix versus Windows, I also focused on the subject matter experts and the leads for these groups, because I understood the organization of people. I could better manipulate that organization to get better results. So rather than having individual contributors on the call, we had the people who divide out the work within the Unix environment on the call. And so that when I brought defects that were Unix specific, they can now assign them appropriately to the application. Now, the leadership of the organization wanted us to get these calls together, and that was going to be the only way we interacted. But I could easily see that sometimes there was a specific application that had problems, and the other people on the call had no problems in their environment or their applications. So, again, why do we want to have people on a call who are not directly benefiting from the call? So instead of having hundreds of people on the call, instead of even having 25 people on the call, sometimes I would have individual calls with a specific group who I can tell by the defect reports are having a little bit of problems. Now, let's talk about the social engineering, because number two of the skill that you need is the ability to maximize individual productivity. So I'm maximizing productivity by not wasting people's time. But by meeting with people individually, we can talk specifically to their problem without concern of embarrassment, without concern of peer pressure. We can just bring in the subject matter experts that they need, and we're focusing on maybe 5 or 10 people on a call, coming up with an issue. So we used an issue management methodology where we come up with the issue, define the root cause, develop corrective actions, and then it's focused. So there's nobody else on that call except for the people who want to be on the call, who benefit from being on the call, and then who's through the productivity of that call have a direct advantage. However, there's a social engineering element that I added that was beyond what we're doing here. Now, I did get criticized for having too many meetings because me as an individual had meetings every hour of the day with different groups, and then there was paperwork I had to do to figure out what we're going to focus on. But again, the productivity talks for itself, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I would take the success stories from individual groups, and then I also cultivated leaders among the entire population. And so we would have specialized tactical groups that would go after kind of these universal defects that impacted both the Unix and the Windows environment. And we would have the decision makers there and the subject matter experts there in a small work group focusing on one problem. And then I would take the success stories from all these small meetings, and then we'd have a larger meeting that had just the leads on it. And of course, we'd have agenda written in advance so the individuals could decide whether or not they're going to be there. But we would then praise the successes of individuals as they're performing things. And even more importantly, we started documenting best practices. So individuals could pull from the library of best practices that were developed by their peers and ultimately implement many of these solutions so that they never came up on a call talking about the problems. Now, the complexity of what I set up is a little bit more than we can cover in a podcast. And I can show you specific application if you're in an environment where you're resolving defects. But again, it didn't matter whether there are hundreds of thousands of defects or there are 40,000 servers or there were 50 leads and thousands of individual contributors. We narrowed focus down to those people who can maximize the benefit. And then we amplified and promoted the benefit to supervisors. So here's the last part of what I did. And this is a problem solving skill, which is number three, the problem solving skill. What we noticed is that some of these problems could be easily resolved in a short time period. So the mean time between discovery of the problem and the solution of the problem was short for some, but others it could take months because we have applications. It's a very complex environment. And so when leadership wanted to measure the mean time between failures, which is how often do certain types of environments fail, and then the time to resolution, which is the how quickly can we resolve the problem that we do find, we had numbers all over the place. So, for example, the Unix environment tended to have a long period of discovery and solving the problem, but they could roll out the solution very quickly. There's a lot of scripting and a lot of server images and different things. Where the Windows environment tend to have very short troubleshooting because there were only a few things that would go wrong, and then ultimately a very long implementation because those applications had a greater impact to the larger environment. And sometimes it was vice versa. And so by saying, okay, it takes a typical 30 days to resolve the problem, it ignores the fact that in some environments you could have 90 days. And if those environments are going to get punished for taking 90 days when it's typical for their environment, we're not moving forward with the resources we need. So the resources was the problem. The business would say, "Oh, well, those Unix machines are taking too long to solve problems, and so we're going to just replace them with Windows machines because Windows is solving problems so quickly." We had to not only be able to present our reports in a logical fashion, but we had to present the data sets that got us the resources to properly appropriate to solve the right problems so that we could eliminate all the critical defects in the environment. So I talked about best practices. I talked about highlighting successes so people feel motivated to have wins. I talked about organizing people so we have the right people on the calls. Now, what I added to this was a senior executive meeting where we went over success stories. So, a couple leads come in, talk about their success stories, talk about how they overcame things, and then we help contextualize the metrics for those individuals. Okay, this is very important. We were helping the leadership understand that we have to measure performance based on. So, I wasn't telling them that their measures were wrong. I was saying we have to measure performance on categorization and application because of the complexity was in the application, not in the operating system. Because once we determined a best practice to solve a defect, that solution could be applied to any server, doesn't matter the application, but the time to implement inside the application depends on what that application is going through in its life cycle. Again, very complex, but it's these three skills of organizing people, having the right people in the right place, having the right skills, and it's a lot of cataloging, it's a lot of individual interviews, it's a lot of and by the way, I had a direct line reporting to these individuals primarily through a reporting system that automatically scanned every night to see if these problems still existed. Okay, so we're in an operational risk management position. There's scanning software to see if these risks still exist in the environment, and so there's a lot of automated pressure. We had to organize people around that. We had to increase individual productivity because every day the big bosses were getting a report that said, you still have these defects. And so, how do we prevent those distractions? So, I did run a lot of interference. And again, organizing the executives into a briefing meeting where the leads came in and talked about successes and talked about what these numbers mean helped a lot. Organizing the individual groups so that they had maximum value in the calls helps a lot. I think we got down to an hour meeting with each of the 25 leads by operating system, which is 2 hours of meetings for me, probably 2 hours of prep for each meeting. And then basically they left with homework assignments or success stories. And then we had one executive meeting twice a month, which was about an hour each, required about 4 hours of prep. And then, of course, custom reporting. But again, three, we're solving problems. An executive sits down to a meeting and they say, okay, I understand why it takes so damn long to solve this category of problem. And so what we're going to do is what one of my supervisors described as proactive preventative measures in order to not have the problem exist in the future. So we actually shift the metrics from how often do things break or what's the time it takes to fix something that breaks to does it stay fixed, which in hindsight is very logical, but it was not the initial drive from executives. Executives wanted to have all the problems solved with no determination by priority, where we ended up with that when an auditor shows up, they will not find a critical issue because all the critical and high issues were resolved. And then the other issues were fixed in the configuration of the platform rather than the maintenance of the platform. So as we rolled out new servers, those new servers didn't have any of the problems that we were finding in previous servers, and that was considered a success rather than how quickly can we fix things that are broken. And so again, when we're using these three skills and we're building the relationships necessary to organize people and to help individuals be productive and to solve problems, we now shift the thinking to things shouldn't break. The natural state of our environment is not to have defects. And so once we resolved the defects, we eliminated the need for half of these meetings because there were no defects. Now, there were no high or critical defects. There were still configuration defects and such. And I did run a model to identify which groups had repeat defects, and we resolved those groups, which types of processes had repeat defects, and that was, of course, on my end. But when it came to those engineers who were launching new systems, who were configuring new environments, who were also replacing environments over a year or so, they were able to make better server images, better configuration plans, and ultimately better implementation of their work. Now, was that what I was supposed to be solving for? Of course not. I was supposed to be monitoring a defect report and encouraging these people to resolve the defects. Instead, I engineered an environment where defects were not normal, and that normal was a compliance system that fit both security, operating system, and other types of policy that we had in the organization by design. So it wasn't an afterthought, it was the first thing we did. And then we went in and adapted policy for best practices and then made sure that our environment was cookie cutter. In fact, in some environments, here's how we ended up resolving the defects. We would end up having some servers with defects. They tended to be older servers. And so instead of fixing the defects, we just replaced the server because we had a virtual environment, so we didn't need a physical server anymore. We could basically come in with a virtual image that was the best version of that old server, and it had better hardware, and it had better disk access, and it had better speed, and we would just decommission the old server. And so one of the times the executive came by and said, "Why are you decommissioning so many servers?" And it turns out that we were decommissioning servers that had leases associated with them, that had physical hardware in the data center associated with it, that had higher than average costs. And so they were upset why we were decommissioning so many servers. But when we showed them the cost savings that were far beyond the cost to repair, then they understood why some of those servers had the defect for 120 days. We actually accepted the risk, resolved what we knew best practices for, accepted the risk, but in parallel had a migration plan to get those servers out of the network. So in fact, we were eliminating defects by eliminating defective environments. Again, that's not what I was hired to do, but that is the beneficial result that makes you indispensable. So if you've got a problem in your business and it seems simple, there are ways of looking at it by organizing the right people, by maximizing individual productivity, and by solving the problems that need to get solved. Not the problems that they identified, but we're using, again, the issue management methodology to develop a problem statement, identify root cause, and then identify corrective actions so that we can say, do we even need to solve this problem? Some of the executives, and this is critical to understand, and I know you're facing this in your environments, but some of the executives wanted us to have like 0-day fixes or to have like 10-day fixes. When we told them that we weren't going to fix certain problems, we're just going to replace the servers because the new version of that server doesn't have any of these problems. They thought we were spending money. We were, in fact, eliminating hundreds of hours of work by just kicking off a new image, an image that had been tested, an image that had no defects, an image that didn't require downtime of the application, an image that we could roll into a service pool rather than having to take something and shut it down and bring it back up. When you implement these three methodologies, people are going to look at you like you're crazy. Now, those in the know, those who are being praised for their successes, those who are helping you develop the implementation, they will know that this is powerful. Executives may not until you work out the communications. So ultimately, what we're doing here is we're applying a methodology that is making you a powerful leader in your area. It's not necessarily making it easy for others to understand what you do. So we have to, and this is the last point, we have to build the association with the successes as you as the organizer. So these successes happen when you're in charge. Therefore, we need to make you in charge of more things. Now, I will admit it's a lot of hard work on my part to organize meetings, to prep for the meetings, to write custom reports. And so you have to be familiar with the technology to make it easier. And so in this particular environment, I had to do a lot of things that weren't necessarily in my work scope. But if I could pull up a report and I could let my leaders in the field doing the work pull up a report, and I made it easy for them to find out what needs to be done and for them to have successes, they by de facto turn to me for advice, to me for solutions. I then can go to the other people in the group, document their best practices, and now share the best practices so overall we get better successes. People who were interacting with me in this environment got promoted. It built relationships for me to find new opportunities. It built relationships with leadership for them to know that I can get the work done. And ultimately, it was three powerful skills that every leader must master. It's the ability to organize people, the ability to maximize individual productivity, especially those who are working with you, and then solve meaningful problems, the problem solving skills. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. If you want certain access and leverage in an organization, if you want to be not only seen as the person who can get things done, but you can actually get things done, then you're in the right place. Come join us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. We've got a newsletter that shares these insights and tips. We've got a paid membership program where we talk more in detail about your specific needs, and we apply the concept of strategic relations. We are transforming business relationships into profits. I know it's a difficult topic to understand, but we break it down into these bite sized chunks so that you can implement. Start today. How are you organizing people? How are you helping others be more productive? And then how are you solving real and meaningful problems? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next podcast.